Let's dive into a real legal head-scratcher. It's a story where a court looked at a terrible crime and said, yes, this happened, but then also said the guilty person couldn't be punished. So how on earth is that even possible?
I mean, that's the central question here. And it just doesn't sound right, does it? How can you confirm someone did something wrong, but then say they're exempt from any kind of criminal penalty? Well, as we're about to see, the law can work in some very unexpected ways.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. The story kicks off with a very serious crime. And for a long time, it looked like a pretty straightforward path to justice.
So here's the timeline. The crime itself happened way back in 1996. The accused, Jomar Ortega, was only 13 years old. 3 years later, the regional trial court finds him guilty. A year after that, the Court of Appeals agrees. This case spent 12 long years moving through the system before finally landing at the Supreme Court.
Now the crucial thing to get here is the consistency. You had two different courts look at all the evidence and come to the exact same conclusion: guilty. So at this point, it seemed like a done deal. But the whole thing didn't just rest on evidence. It came down to whose story you believed. At the absolute heart of this trial were two completely different stories, and the conviction really hinged on who the court found more believable, the victim and her family, or the boy who was accused. Okay, so on one side, the prosecution's case was incredibly powerful. You had the victim's 10-year-old brother testifying that he literally walked in and saw the assault happening. The 6-year-old victim also described 3 different attacks. Ortega, on the other hand, denied everything. He claimed it was all just innocent fun, just playful dancing. So how did the courts decide who was telling the truth? Well, their reasoning is right there in the final decision. The court basically argued that no parent would ever put their child through the trauma and humiliation of a public trial like this unless the accusation was absolutely true. And that's why they believed the family. And this is where the entire story gets turned on its head. While this case was sitting, waiting for its final appeal, something totally unrelated happened that changed everything. The country's laws changed. 15. Just let that number sink in for a second. It's the absolute key to this entire legal puzzle. It represents a massive shift in how the justice system thinks about young offenders. You see, in 2006, the Philippines passed a new law called the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act, and its biggest change was this: it raised the minimum age of criminal responsibility. Before, a kid as young as 9 could be held criminally liable. After this law, that jumped all the way up to 15. Kids 15 and under were now exempt. And there it is. That's the conflict, right? The crime happened in 1996, when Ortega was 13. Under the old law, he was responsible. But under this brand new law passed a decade later, he wasn't. So, which law do you use? The answer lies in a really fundamental principle of criminal law, one that explains how a new law can actually reach back in time and change the outcome of a case that's already in progress. This isn't some new, made-up idea. It's written right into Article 22 of the Revised Penal Code. And to put it simply, it means that if a new criminal law is more favorable or, nicer to an accused person, you have to apply that new, nicer law to them, even if their crime happened under an older, tougher law. It's a principle of leniency. So you can see how this plays out, right? Step 1, Ortega is tried under the old, harsher law. Step 2, while his case is still pending, this new, more favorable law gets passed. Which means, step 3, the Supreme Court has no choice. They have to apply the new law to his case. This brings us to the final, absolutely fascinating verdict from the Supreme Court, where they had to somehow square the facts of the crime with the demands of this new law. First things first, and this is super important, the Supreme Court did not say the crime didn't happen. In fact, they agreed with the lower courts. They said that based on all the evidence and testimony, Jomar Ortega did commit the acts he was accused of. Factual guilt? Confirmed. So here's how they split it. It's a 2-part decision. Ortega's criminal liability was dismissed. Why? Because he was 13, and the new law, applied retroactively, exempts him from punishment like a prison sentence. But, and this is a big but, his civil liability was upheld. The law is really clear. Just because you're exempt from criminal punishment doesn't mean you're off the hook for compensating the victim. And so while Ortega would not serve any time, the court ordered him to pay the victim a total of 200,000 pesos.
That payment is an acknowledgement of the harm that was done, even if the state couldn't impose a criminal penalty anymore.
But the story doesn't quite end there, because the Supreme Court itself recognized the broader and sometimes pretty troubling side effects of the very law it was forced to apply. I mean, listen to this. In a footnote to their own decision, the court pointed out a serious real-world consequence. They noted that criminal syndicates were already starting to exploit this law, using kids under 15 as drug couriers, specifically because they knew these children were immune from prosecution.
But here's the thing. The court made it really clear that, despite those concerns, its hands were tied. It's not their job to judge whether a law is good or bad, or whether it's a wise policy. Their constitutional duty is to interpret and apply the laws that the legislature passes. Period. And that's really what we're left with, isn't it? This case perfectly highlights the tension between two really important goals: trying to protect and rehabilitate young people who do wrong, and at the same time, making sure victims get a real sense of justice. It's a delicate balance, and there are absolutely no easy answers.